Federal Debt versus Deficit video lesson. A macro video lesson with Steve Reff and Eric Almiroth.
Today, Eric and I are going to talk to you about what's called the U.S. government debt and the U.S. government deficit. What you're looking at right now is called the United States national debt or government debt. Eric, can you give us the definition of U.S. government debt or national debt?
This refers to what the U.S. government owes.
Boy, that's a pretty simple definition. You know, I had an argument with some college professors. They said, no, that's not the definition. The definition is the accumulation of all deficits and surpluses. A deficit is when the government overspends what it receives in a year. And they said it's the accumulation of all deficits and surpluses.
Well, I think it's very important you just pointed out the word deficit refers to the yearly overspending. I like the definition. The national debt is the accumulation of all the yearly budget deficits or the yearly overspending. There are also sometimes yearly budget surpluses. Whether those are going to subtract from the national debt, it is up to the discretion of Congress to determine whether or not they will use those surpluses to pay down the debt.
Or they could use the surpluses to pay into the Social Security Trust Fund, which they've been borrowing from, so they can use that money to spend on a yearly basis.
And whereas I would just hope they would cut stimulus checks to people like me for et cetera, right?
Or, pay me a check so it goes into my Steve Reff Goes to Hawaii fund. Okay, so Eric, we're going to take a look at this clock and everybody can see that it's running. The first three numbers are hundreds. The next three numbers are thousands. And if you look at this 9, this is $9.5 million. So we're going to see how fast the government's national debt goes up by $1 million. So when this turns into a 0, I'm going to start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. Was that 26 seconds?
Here, I timed it on my phone so you can see.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the national debt at this point in time is rising at $1 million every 26 seconds.
This means the government is overspending. This isn't just government spending here. What we're talking about is adding $1 million to the national debt every 26 seconds. Not to be confused with just government spending, using money that we have, paying expenditures. This is overspending beyond what we already owe.
What's the difference between debt? You said it is the total amount owed, or I said it's the accumulation of all deficits and surpluses. What does the term deficit mean then?
Deficit is the yearly budget overspending. The national debt is the entire overspending since the beginning of America.
Okay, the government brings in money by either taxing, borrowing, it could sell assets. The government accumulates money by taxation and all the different taxations that they have. The tax revenue collected is less than the government spending in a year, or when government spending is greater than the tax revenue collected in that year.
The government fiscal policy is taxing and spending. And when the government spends more in a year period than it accepts or accumulates in taxes, we have a budget deficit.
So we can almost set up a formula where we say GS, government spending, is greater than T, taxes, in a year, to make it simple for students to remember that that's the deficit.
Yes.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is the deficit. Let's expand upon this. When we're looking at this government deficit, we're looking at taxes and government spending. Can you tell me a little bit about what's here about taxes?
Well, as you can see, taxes are revenues, the money the government takes in, indicated as the numbers in green versus what our expenditures are, which is money going out, which is in the red blocks. Our largest tax revenues in the upper left area under taxes is individual income tax at $849 billion a year in 2004, $898 in 2010. Corporate income taxes at $169 billion in 2004, $191 in 2010. Social insurance and retirement, $765 and $864 in 2010. So that's the major ones that are the taxes government is receiving for their revenue.
So when you add up all these taxes, these two numbers from 2004 and 2010 are going to become important in the formula.
Yes, total receipts, government revenues.
In fact, did you know in the federal budget, they don't call it taxes, they call it receipts rather than taxes because it's what the government is bringing in.
Yes, that's important to remember.
Now, when we look at the government spending and the list that starts in that first column and then goes over to that next column, we can look at those major government expenditures and these two numbers down below here for 2004 and 2010. We can figure out what the deficit would have been in both of those years by doing what?
Look at the total of those 2 years for what the government has spent. And by the way, there's quite a bit of difference that appears between 2004 and 2010. It would be interesting to see what that is now, which is probably about twice that. And we compare it to the green area up there onto the left where we see total receipts. If we subtract government spending from the tax dollars we receive or are accumulated, and we see because government spending is greater than the taxes received, we have a serious budget deficit in both years.
And we're going to show you what those deficits are in each one of those years right now. Thank you, Eric. This has been a really interesting lesson on the difference between debt and deficit because too many people who've never studied economics don't even understand these two terms, and I think we've simplified it for everybody.
I think this is important vocabulary for every American voter to be very clear on and for being able to sort out daily news people are talking about.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Rep. The